The setup introduced the characters and world. The moon of Velthra was a breathtaking place, glowing softly with its silver-blue forests and sparkling rivers. It was the crown jewel of the Zarnov system, ruled by the royal family for generations. At the heart of it all stood the Grand Palace, a structure of shimmering crystal and light that reflected the endless beauty of Velthra. Inside its elegant halls lived Princess Zelira, the youngest and most spirited member of the royal family. Zelira was unlike any other member of her family. While her older siblings spent their time in diplomacy and governance, Zelira preferred adventure and fun. She had a reputation for playing tricks on anyone who dared come too close. From palace guards to her royal attendants, no one was safe from her pranks. But despite her playful nature, there was something lonely about Zelira. Behind her bright green eyes and mischievous smile, she hid a longing for freedom, a life beyond the confines of royal duty. Her carefree days, however, were about to change. The royal advisors had been uneasy for weeks. Reports of strange movements by rival factions had reached the palace. The Draven Syndicate, an enemy known for its ruthless tactics, had been growing bolder. Threats against the royal family were no longer just whispers. They were real and dangerous. That was when Captain Liam Carter was brought in. Liam was a human soldier from Earth, working for the Intergalactic Protection Force. He was tall, with sharp features and a quiet strength that spoke of years of battle experience. His brown eyes were serious, and his every move showed discipline. When Liam arrived at the palace, he was briefed on his mission: protect Princess Zelira at all costs. At first, Liam wasn't thrilled about the assignment. He had fought in wars, led missions, and taken down dangerous criminals. Babysitting a royal princess didn't seem like a task worthy of his skills. But orders were orders, and he was determined to do his job well. Zelira, on the other hand, found Liam fascinating. She had never met a human before, and his stoic nature made him the perfect target for her jokes. "Captain Carter," she said on their first meeting, a sly grin on her face. "Do humans always look so serious, or is it just you?" Liam didn't flinch. "My job is to protect you, Your Highness, not entertain you." That only made Zelira laugh. "Oh, this is going to be fun." From that day, Zelira made it her mission to break through Liam's tough exterior. She would hide behind doors and jump out to scare him, replace his standard-issue boots with ones that glowed in the dark, and once even filled his room with harmless floating orbs that hummed when touched. Liam, though annoyed, never let it show. He would simply sigh and clean up the mess, his patience as steady as a rock. But deep down, he couldn't help but admire Zelira's energy. She was a challenge he hadn't expected, and though he would never admit it, her tricks made him smile when she wasn't looking. Still, Liam remained vigilant. The palace might seem peaceful on the surface, but danger could strike at any moment. He studied every corridor, memorized every exit, and kept his weapons within reach. One night, as the twin moons of Velthra lit up the sky, Liam stood on the balcony outside Zelira's chambers, keeping watch. Inside, Zelira was unusually quiet. She sat by the window, staring at the moons. Her usual spark was missing, replaced by a rare seriousness. "Captain Carter," she called softly. Liam stepped inside, his posture still stiff and alert. "Yes, Your Highness." She turned to look at him, her voice low. "Do you ever feel like you don't belong where you are?" Liam hesitated. The question caught him off guard. "I don't think about that. My job is to stay where I'm needed." Zelira smiled faintly. "And you think you're needed here, protecting me from enemies you can't even see?" "It's my duty," he replied firmly. Zelira sighed and looked back at the sky. "You don't understand. Protecting me might cost you everything." Liam frowned. There was something in her tone, something he couldn't quite place. But before he could ask, Zelira stood up, her playful mask slipping back into place. "Well, good night, Captain Sirius," she said with a smirk. Don't let the Draven Syndicate get you while you're standing guard. She walked to her bed and lay down, her back to him. Liam stayed where he was, watching her for a moment longer. He had been on dozens of missions before, but something about this one felt different. As the night deepened, the palace seemed calm, but Liam couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was just around the corner. He tightened his grip on his weapon, his eyes scanning the shadows. Whatever came next, he would be ready. And unknown to both Liam and Celira, the danger was closer than they thought. Conflict introduced. The threat and the first test. The palace of Velthra shimmered under the twin moons, but its glow couldn't hide the tension in the air. Captain Liam Carter had spent weeks preparing for the worst, yet he could feel something was different about this night. The usual stillness of the royal grounds felt almost too quiet. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound amplified. Liam was on edge. His instincts, honed by years of battle, screamed that danger was near. He tightened his grip on his plasma rifle and scanned the perimeter. Inside the palace, Princess Celira lounged on a luxurious chair, casually flicking a glowing crystal ball in her hand. Her playful demeanor was intact, but Liam noticed her eyes darting to the windows more often than usual. "You seem jumpy tonight, Princess," Liam said, his voice low and steady. Celira shrugged, her lips curving into a smile. "Oh, Captain Sirius, always worrying about shadows. What could possibly happen in my well-guarded palace?" Before Liam could respond, a loud boom echoed through the palace. The walls trembled, and a sudden burst of light from the main hall illuminated the night. The tranquil palace was instantly thrown into chaos. Liam was already moving. He reached Celira in 3 swift strides, his rifle aimed at the door. "Stay behind me," he ordered. For once, Celira didn't argue. Her playful mask dropped, and a flicker of fear crossed her face. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. "Stay close and keep quiet," Liam said, his tone leaving no room for debate. The sound of blaster fire erupted outside, followed by panicked screams. Liam's earpiece crackled with desperate voices from the palace guards. "They've breached the main gates," one shouted. "We're under attack. It's the Draven Syndicate." Liam's jaw tightened. He had suspected this might happen, but the speed of the attack was alarming. The Draven Syndicate wasn't just here to send a message. They had come to kill. He turned to Celira. "We need to move. Now." "But the palace." "No arguments," Liam snapped. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the hidden passage he had memorized during his initial briefing. The princess stumbled after him, unaccustomed to the sudden urgency. As they ran through the winding corridors, the palace shook with each explosion. The once beautiful crystal walls now fractured, sending shards scattering like deadly rain. Liam kept Celira close, his sharp eyes scanning for threats. They burst into a dimly lit hallway, only to find 2 Draven Syndicate assassins blocking their path. The aliens were tall, clad in black armor that shimmered like oil, their eyes glowing a menacing red. Liam didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired 2 precise shots. The first assassin crumpled to the ground, but the second dodged with inhuman speed, charging at them with a blade that shimmered with energy. "Stay back," Liam shouted, shoving Celira behind him. The assassin lunged, but Liam met the attack head-on. His movements were quick and calculated, years of combat training coming into play. He sidestepped the blade and delivered a crushing blow to the alien's chest, sending it crashing into the wall. With one swift motion, Liam aimed his rifle and fired. The assassin fell, lifeless. Celira stared at him, wide-eyed. "That was impressive," she managed, her voice trembling. Liam didn't respond. He was already moving again, his focus unshaken. "This way," he said curtly. They entered the hidden passage, a narrow tunnel carved into the palace's foundation. It was dark and cold, the air heavy with dampness. Celira followed closely, her usual confidence replaced by quiet fear. "Do you always act like this during attacks?" she asked, trying to lighten the mood, but her voice wavered. Liam glanced back briefly. "This is nothing. You should see a real war zone." They emerged into the palace gardens, now a battlefield. Bodies of guards and attackers lay scattered across the once pristine grounds. Fires burned in the distance, and the smell of smoke filled the air. Liam spotted a hovercraft hidden behind a collapsed archway. "There, we need to get to that craft," he said. As they moved, Zelira hesitated. "Wait," she said, her voice shaking. "What about the others? My family, the staff?" Liam turned to her, his expression hard. "If we don't get you out of here, no one else matters. You're the priority." "But." "No buts," he snapped. "This isn't a game, princess. You don't understand what they'll do to you if they catch you." Something in his tone silenced her. Zelira nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, and followed him to the hovercraft. As Liam activated the craft, a sudden surge of energy filled the air. A low hum, almost like a vibration, grew louder. Liam froze, his instincts screaming danger. Out of the shadows, a towering figure emerged. It was a Draven warlord, its massive frame clad in dark armor that pulsed with red energy. It carried a weapon unlike anything Liam had seen, a long staff with a glowing blade at each end. The warlord's voice was deep and guttural. "Hand over the princess, human, and I'll make your death quick." Liam didn't flinch. He stepped in front of Zelira, his rifle aimed at the warlord's chest. "You'll have to kill me first." The warlord chuckled darkly. "So be it." The battle that followed was unlike anything Zelira had ever seen. Liam moved with precision and speed, dodging the warlord's strikes and returning fire whenever he found an opening. The air crackled with energy as the two clashed, the sound of their fight drowning out the chaos around them. Finally, with a well-placed shot, Liam hit a weak point in the warlord's armor. The alien let out a guttural roar and collapsed to the ground, its weapon falling silent. Liam turned to Zelira, his face streaked with sweat and dirt. "Get in the craft," he ordered. Without a word, she obeyed, her heart pounding as the hovercraft lifted off. As they soared into the night sky, Zelira looked back at the burning palace. For the first time, she realized just how dangerous her life truly was, and just how far Liam was willing to go to protect her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the craft. Liam didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, scanning for threats. The real fight, he knew, was only beginning. Zelira's vulnerability. A shift in the dynamic. The air was thick with tension as Liam and Zelira soared over the devastated landscape of Velthra. The royal palace was now nothing more than a smoldering ruin, consumed by flames. The night sky, once a peaceful sea of stars, now felt like a vast, uncaring void. Their hovercraft cut through the darkness, leaving a trail of light behind them as it ascended to the safety of the hidden mountains. Zelira sat in silence beside Liam, her usual playful spark nowhere to be found. Her gaze was distant, her mind clearly miles away, trapped in thoughts of her home and the people she had left behind. She could still hear the screams of palace guards in her mind, the sound of battle echoing in her ears. She had never seen violence like this before. The weight of it was crushing. Liam, for his part, remained calm, his focus sharp as he piloted the craft. He kept his eyes on the radar, always scanning for potential threats, though his thoughts were heavy as well. The mission had shifted. No longer was he simply the protector of a spoiled, playful princess. Now he was responsible for keeping her alive in a world that was suddenly very hostile. But despite the danger, Liam couldn't help but notice a shift in Zelira. She was no longer the carefree, trickster princess he had grown to tolerate. The calm, composed facade she wore so often had cracked, and in its place, a vulnerability that made her seem much more human, and much more real than he had ever imagined. Zelira stared out the window, her face pale, her fingers gripping the edge of her seat. She hadn't said a word since they left the palace, but Liam could sense the change in her. It was subtle at first, the way her shoulders slumped a little more with each passing minute, the way she shied away from his gaze whenever he glanced her way. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Zelira spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "What happens now?" Liam looked over at her, surprised by the depth of the question. She had always seemed so sure of herself, so confident in her royal status. But now she seemed lost, adrift in a world that had suddenly turned against her. "I don't know," he answered honestly, his voice steady. "But I'll make sure we survive. That's all we can do right now." Zelira turned her eyes to him then, her green gaze searching his face as if trying to read him. "And you'll protect me, no matter what." Liam nodded without hesitation. "I gave my word." A small, sad smile flickered across Zelira's lips, but it was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared. She looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. "I don't understand," she murmured, more to herself than to Liam. I thought my family's enemies would never get this close. I never thought it would end like this. I never thought I would be running." Liam frowned, feeling a pang of sympathy for her, even though he knew he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Zelira had always seemed so invincible, so untouchable, that he hadn't considered what it might feel like to be her, to be the leader of an entire kingdom, burdened with the weight of expectations, and yet unable to do anything to stop the destruction of everything she had known. "Sometimes, no matter how hard we fight, things don't go the way we want," Liam said, his voice soft but firm. "But we have to keep moving forward. You can't change what's happened, but you can change what happens next." Zelira met his eyes then, and for the first time since they had started this journey, there was a flicker of something else in her expression. It wasn't the playful princess she used to be, but it wasn't the broken royal either. It was something in between, something raw and real, something Liam had never seen in her before. "Do you ever feel?" Zelira began, hesitating as if unsure of how to finish the thought. "Do you ever feel like you're more than what you were born to be? Like you have something more to give?" Liam blinked, taken aback by the depth of her question. He had never really thought about it that way. He had been a soldier, trained to protect, to fight, to survive. But to think of himself as more than that, it was a strange thought. "I don't know," he said slowly. "I've never really thought about it. I just do my job." Zelira's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "I've never really had the chance to think about anything else either. Being a princess, it's not what people think. They think it's all about the palace and the luxury and the power, but they don't see the chains of responsibility. The weight of being the symbol of a kingdom." Liam looked at her for a long moment, realizing how little he knew about her life, about the pressure she carried every day. "Sounds like a prison," he said softly. Zelira's gaze softened, and for a moment, her vulnerability seemed almost tangible. "Sometimes it feels that way. Like I'm not allowed to be anything else. Just the princess. Just the hair." They were silent for a few moments, the hum of the hovercraft the only sound between them. Then Zelira spoke again, her voice quieter, as if confessing a secret. "I'm scared, Liam." Liam's heart skipped a beat at her words. It wasn't the kind of thing he expected to hear from her. Zelira, the confident and bold princess, admitting fear. But in that moment, it felt like the most honest thing she had said. He turned to face her, his tone steady but reassuring. "It's okay to be scared. It's what you do with that fear that matters." Zelira swallowed, her eyes distant again. "What if I'm not strong enough?" "You are," Liam said firmly. "You're stronger than you think. You just need to believe it." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to see if he truly believed what he was saying. There was a pause, and then, unexpectedly, she reached out and touched his arm. "Thank you, Liam," she whispered. for not giving up on me." Liam felt a strange warmth at her touch, a connection that was no longer just that of a protector and his charge. There was something deeper, something unspoken between them, something that made the uncertainty of their future feel a little less daunting. As the hovercraft continued its journey through the night, Liam and Celira sat side by side in silence, each wrestling with their own fears and hopes. For the first time, Liam wondered if he could help Celira find more than just survival in this war. Perhaps together, they could find a way to change the future. But that was a thought for another time. For now, they had to survive. And that, for both of them, was enough. A growing connection, the calm before the storm. The days following their escape from the palace were a blur of travel and survival. Celira and Liam found refuge in the wild jungles of Velthra, far from the reach of Draven Syndicate forces. Here, in the thick forests where ancient trees towered high and the air was humid with the scent of damp earth, they could breathe for a moment. At least in theory. But danger still loomed. The hovercraft was a temporary solution, but it could only take them so far. Once they reached the dense jungles, they had to abandon it, choosing instead to rely on their wits and Celira's knowledge of the land. Her royal upbringing had never prepared her for such an existence. This harsh world of survival, filled with creatures both breathtaking and terrifying. Still, she adapted quickly, her natural resilience shining through. Celira had always been a figure of grace and beauty, her flowing silver-blue hair and green eyes a reflection of her royal heritage. But here, deep in the jungles, her playful innocence was replaced by a quiet determination. Her usual carefree nature had been dulled by the weight of the situation. And it wasn't just the loss of her palace or her family that haunted her. It was something deeper, something she had never truly acknowledged. Liam, ever the protector, took on the role of the steady, silent guardian. Every step, every choice was calculated. He set up camp, gathered food, and watched the perimeter, always alert. He was used to hardship, used to war, but seeing Celira struggle with the raw, gritty reality of this life made him realize how different it was from the world she had come from. The world of luxury and power, where every need was met without question. Despite the tension and the dangers, there were moments when they would simply stop and sit in silence, allowing the forest to settle around them. It was during these moments that Celira began to speak more, small fragments of herself that she had never shared before. One evening, as the golden light of the setting sun filtered through the thick leaves, Celira sat across from Liam by the fire. The air was still, save for the occasional rustle of creatures in the distance. She had a strange look on her face, her eyes distant as she gazed into the flames. Liam, sharpening his blade, noticed the change. It wasn't the playful princess he had come to know. This was someone else, a person who was still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. "You're quiet tonight," Liam said, setting down the blade and looking at her. "What's on your mind?" Celira sighed deeply, her fingers absently tracing patterns in the dirt. "I'm just thinking about how quickly everything changed. One moment, I was living in the palace, surrounded by people who would die for me. The next moment, I'm hiding in the jungle with only you for company." She chuckled softly, but the sound lacked its usual spark. "Funny, isn't it? I always thought that power was everything. But now, I see it for what it really is." Liam nodded, understanding her words more than she realized. Power isn't about control. It's about surviving when you have nothing left. Celira's eyes flickered with curiosity, and she turned to face him fully. "You speak as if you've lived through it. Have you?" Liam's gaze hardened for a moment, but he didn't flinch. "I've fought battles, watched kingdoms fall. Power means nothing when it's built on lies. I've seen men with the greatest power in the galaxy fall in an instant, their empires gone, because they thought they could control fate." The fire crackled between them, the silence stretching for a few long seconds. Celira studied him more closely now, noting the subtle lines on his face, the way his posture was always just slightly tense, as if he was waiting for something to happen. "You've lost a lot, haven't you?" she asked, her voice soft, almost apologetic. Liam didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back, staring at the sky. The stars were beginning to twinkle above them, a sea of distant lights. It felt like a lifetime since he had been home. "I've seen things," he said quietly. "Things I can't forget. But there's no time to dwell on the past. You move forward, or you die." Zalira didn't speak for a while, her mind whirling. She had always thought of soldiers as cold, emotionless warriors, focused only on their mission. But Liam was different. There was a depth to him, a weight that he carried with him, one that wasn't just about duty. He had seen the worst of the universe, yet he remained steady, unbroken. She couldn't help but feel a growing respect for him, a respect that was slowly becoming something else, something she didn't want to name, but couldn't ignore. As the night deepened, the atmosphere between them shifted. It wasn't just the tension of survival anymore. There was something else, a mutual understanding beginning to take root. They were both alone in this vast, dangerous world. They had both lost everything. And now, they were relying on each other to survive. The days that followed continued the same. They moved cautiously through the jungle, staying hidden from the enemy. But during their brief respites, the connection between them grew. Zalira learned more about Liam's life, his past, his choices, the wars he had fought, and found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected. She began to see the man behind the soldier, the one who had suffered, who had endured loss, who had always kept moving forward despite everything that had tried to break him. And Liam, though he remained focused on his mission, couldn't deny the growing shift between them. Zalira was no longer the playful, unpredictable princess he had been tasked with protecting. She was a partner now, someone he relied on just as much as she relied on him. They were equals in a world that didn't seem to care about them. One afternoon, as they navigated through a thick patch of jungle, Zalira suddenly stopped. She reached out, her hand brushing against a vine-covered tree, and her eyes widened in recognition. "This place. I remember this," she said, her voice soft but full of wonder. "This is the Whispering Grove, an ancient site from my kingdom's history. My ancestors used to come here for guidance." Liam looked around, sensing the change in her. This place, whatever it was, seemed to hold more than just beauty. It held memories. Zalira stepped forward, her fingers tracing the markings on the tree's bark. "I never thought I'd come back here like this, but maybe it's a sign," she whispered to herself. Liam watched her carefully. A sign of what? She turned to him, her expression serious but thoughtful. "A sign that maybe it's time to stop running, time to fight back, time to take control of my destiny." For the first time in days, Liam saw the old spark in her eyes. The princess he had known, the one who had always toyed with him, was still there. But now, she was someone different, someone stronger. And for the first time, Liam realized that this wasn't just about protecting her anymore. This was about standing together. The revelation, Zalira's secret exposed. The jungle had become their sanctuary, a place where the world outside seemed far away, distant and unreal. But Zalira and Liam knew that their respite would not last. The constant fear of the Draven Syndicate, the looming threat of a world in chaos, hung over them like an invisible storm. Despite the beauty of the jungle, they knew they couldn't hide forever. The truth, however, was that Zalira was no longer the same princess who had once ruled the palace with ease. Her carefree nature had been replaced with something far more complex, a deep sense of responsibility, fear, and, as Liam had come to realize, a secret. One evening, after a long day of traveling through thick vegetation and dodging potential enemy patrols, they found a small, hidden clearing near a stream. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the landscape, and the air was thick with the sounds of distant wildlife. Zalira sat by the water, staring at the shimmering surface as if lost in thought. Liam, ever observant, took his usual position by the edge of the clearing, his back to a large tree. eyes scanning the perimeter. For a moment, it was quiet, the weight of the day settling over them. Then, Zelira's voice broke the stillness. "Liam," she said softly, her tone uncharacteristically serious. "There's something I need to tell you." He turned to look at her, sensing the change in her voice, the hesitation in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked, his guard instinctively rising. Zelira took a deep breath, her hands resting on her knees. She stared at the water, avoiding his gaze. "You've been protecting me all this time, but you don't know the whole truth." Liam's brow furrowed, a mix of confusion and concern rising in his chest. He had always trusted Zelira, despite the odd moments of playfulness and the shifting moods, but the seriousness in her voice sent a ripple of unease through him. "The truth?" he asked. "What do you mean?" Zelira finally looked at him, her green eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something deeper, something Liam couldn't quite place. "I'm not just any princess, Liam. I wasn't born the way you think. There's more to me than you realize." Liam stood up, instinctively moving closer, his attention fully on her. "What are you talking about? You've always been royal," she finished for him. "Yes, but my bloodline isn't just royal. It's ancient, and there's a reason the Draven Syndicate wants me dead." Liam's confusion deepened, and for the first time, he allowed his guard to slip. "Why? What do they want with you?" Zelira's gaze dropped to her hands, her fingers shaking slightly. "It's because of what I carry inside me. The gene. The one that can unlock the power of my people's greatest weapon." "The gene?" Liam echoed, still trying to make sense of what she was saying. "What power are you talking about?" She took a slow, measured breath before answering. "My family has hidden it for generations. The royal bloodline of Velthra contains an ancient gene, one that can merge with the DNA of another species. It's the key to unlocking a power that could change the course of the universe." Liam took a step back, trying to process the information. "You mean, you're saying your bloodline is special, that you carry a power?" Zelira nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "Yes, it's a power that allows me to bond with another being, to fuse our genes together. The result is something more than human, more than Velthran. It's a force beyond comprehension, but it's also dangerous." Liam couldn't keep his disbelief in check. "Dangerous? How? And why are you only telling me this now?" Zelira closed her eyes, as if gathering strength. "Because I couldn't let you know. I couldn't let anyone know. It's too dangerous for anyone to understand, especially for you." Liam was starting to feel a surge of confusion, mixed with something else, something that felt like betrayal. "So all this time, you've been hiding this from me? From everyone?" Zelira's eyes flicked to him, her expression pained. "I never wanted anyone to know. I didn't want to become a weapon. But the Draven Syndicate, they've known for years. They've been hunting me because they want to use this power for their own ends. They want to control the universe, and I'm the key." Liam felt the weight of her words pressing down on him. The stakes had just risen dramatically. Zelira wasn't just a princess. She was a weapon, a force of unimaginable power that could change everything. No wonder the Draven Syndicate was after her. No wonder her life had always been so dangerous. "You're saying that if someone bonds with you, if your bloodline merges with theirs, what happens?" Liam asked, his voice low. Zelira's gaze became distant, as if lost in the memory of something dark. "The result is a being of unimaginable power. It's a hybrid, a new species, and whoever controls it controls everything." She looked up at him, her face filled with fear. "But it's not just power that comes from the merge. It's something else, something that could destroy everything, if not done properly." Liam felt a chill run down his spine. "You mean, if you don't bond with someone, you could die?" Zelira nodded, her lips trembling. "Yes, but there's more. If I bond with someone, I don't just transfer power. I bond them to my essence, to my life force. It's a dangerous connection, And if the wrong person gets that power, they could destroy everything in their path. Liam's mind raced, trying to process everything she had just revealed. This was no longer about protecting a princess. This was about protecting the universe from something far more dangerous. But there's a reason they haven't found you yet, Liam said slowly, trying to make sense of the pieces. You've been hiding, haven't you? Celira nodded, her expression grim. For years, my family has kept me hidden. We knew the syndicate would come. We knew they would stop at nothing to get me. That's why I was never meant to leave the palace. But now it's too late. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air between them. There was no going back now. The truth was out. Liam, feeling the enormity of the situation, stepped closer to Celira. We'll figure this out. I won't let anyone use you. I won't let anyone hurt you. Celira looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something she had been holding back for so long. But in that moment, the world outside their camp was closing in. The Draven Syndicate had always been just a shadow, a threat in the distance. But now, with the truth revealed, that shadow was much closer than either of them realized. And their fight for survival had just begun. The ultimate choice: sacrifice or survival. The stars above Velthra's jungle had once been a comforting sight, their soft twinkling lights a reminder of a world far removed from the chaos of war. But now, as Celira and Liam crouched in the thick underbrush, the stars felt distant and cold, like the rest of the universe had abandoned them. The truth had been revealed. Celira's bloodline held a power that could alter the balance of all known life, a weapon that the Draven Syndicate would stop at nothing to control. They had made it this far, surviving by the skin of their teeth, but now the stakes had shifted completely. Celira's eyes were wide with fear as she looked out at the encroaching darkness, her heart racing. She could still feel the heavy weight of the ancient gene inside her, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. The bond it required, the merger of DNA with another. She had always known it would come to this, but she had never imagined it would happen under these circumstances. The world had shifted beneath her feet, and she didn't know if she could find solid ground again. Liam, his face grim and determined, kept his gaze trained on the path ahead. They had been moving cautiously through the jungle for hours, avoiding Draven Syndicate patrols, but they both knew it was only a matter of time before they were discovered. He had always prided himself on his calm under pressure, but even he couldn't shake the growing dread that gnawed at him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about choosing between the survival of one person or the survival of the galaxy. The Syndicate is closing in, Liam muttered, his voice low but filled with certainty. We're running out of time. Celira nodded but didn't speak. She knew it too. The forest around them, once a place of refuge, now felt like a trap. Every shadow could be a trap, every breeze a whisper of an enemy about to strike. The Draven Syndicate's forces had grown bolder in their pursuit of her. What started as a few scattered bounty hunters had now escalated into a full-scale offensive. They had already lost the palace. They couldn't afford to lose Celira. She was the key to the power that could control everything. And she knew, if she didn't bond with the right person soon, the power would be lost to the Syndicate, and there would be nothing anyone could do to stop them. But there was another truth she hadn't shared with Liam, one that weighed even more heavily on her heart. She knew who the right person was, and it wasn't just about survival, it was about the bond. The thought terrified her. She had spent her entire life hiding her true nature, keeping this secret buried deep within her. The idea of merging with anyone, of binding them to her life force, felt wrong. But the reality was clear. If she didn't, she would die. And if the wrong person bonded with her, the results could be catastrophic. The power wasn't something anyone could control without destroying themselves in the process. Liam had been her protector, her unwavering companion throughout this journey, but he was also a soldier, a man who had fought in wars, seen kingdoms fall, and bled for causes that had nothing to do with him. She had begun to trust him, to depend on him in ways she hadn't allowed herself to with anyone else. And yet, the thought of him taking on the bond, it was too much to bear. She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "Liam." He looked back at her, his expression unreadable. "What is it, princess?" Zalira took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "There's a reason you've been protecting me, why I trust you more than anyone else. But there's something you don't know. The bond, it has to be made with someone who can handle the power. Someone who is strong enough." Liam frowned, his brows furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean?" Zalira looked away, her eyes staring blankly into the dense forest ahead. "The power inside me. It's not just a gift. It's a curse. And whoever merges with me, whoever becomes my other half, they'll carry that burden too. It's not just about surviving. It's about becoming something more, something no one should ever be." Liam didn't speak at first. He had seen enough death, enough suffering, to understand the weight of her words. But there was something about the way Zalira spoke, the vulnerability in her voice, that made his heart ache for her. He had always known there was more to her than the playful princess who teased him, but he hadn't realized just how heavy her crown really was. "I'm not afraid of the burden," Zalira, Liam said, his voice steady. "I've carried the weight of loss and war for years. I can handle it." She shook her head, her voice trembling as she spoke. "It's not just about handling it. It's about losing yourself to it. This power, it can destroy everything. It can destroy us." Liam stepped closer to her, his eyes searching hers for answers. "So what do we do now?" Zalira swallowed hard, the pressure of the decision she faced weighing heavily on her shoulders. She could see the sincerity in Liam's eyes, the determination to protect her, to protect everyone. But there was one more thing she needed to say, one final truth that would change everything. "I don't want to do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I don't have a choice. The bond. It must happen soon, or we'll both die. But if we do this, if I bond with you," she faltered, her emotions overwhelming her, "you'll never be the same again, Liam. You won't be you anymore." Liam's heart clenched at her words, but he didn't back away. He had faced impossible odds before, fought battles he had no hope of winning. He had always survived. But this was different. This wasn't about survival, it was about sacrifice. "I understand," Liam said quietly, "but we've already lost so much. If we don't stop the syndicate, there won't be anything left for anyone. If I have to lose myself to save the galaxy, then that's what I'll do." Zalira's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't turn away. For the first time, she realized that the true strength of her protector wasn't just in his skill with weapons or his ability to fight. It was in his willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good. For her, the air between them was thick with the gravity of the decision they both faced. They had no more time. The syndicate was closing in, and the final moment was upon them. Zalira reached out, her hand trembling as she touched Liam's. The connection between them was undeniable. In that touch, in that shared understanding, they both knew what had to be done. But neither was ready to face the consequences of their choice. And as the jungle around them seemed to hold its breath, they knew that the future of everything, life, power, survival, hung in the balance. The shocking ending, a new beginning. The silence that followed Zalira and Liam's decision was suffocating. The weight of their choice hung between them like a storm cloud, its thunder waiting to crack open the skies. They stood there, hands clasped, staring at one another, both knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. They had made their decision. The bond would happen, but the cost. The cost was still too unknown. Liam had made his choice to protect her, but the reality of that decision, of what it would mean to merge their lives in such an irreversible way, was starting to settle in. He wasn't afraid of death. He had stared it in the face countless times and come out the other side. But this felt different. The bond was more than death. It was a transformation, a change that would take everything he knew about himself and twist it into something new, something neither of them could predict. Zelira's hand trembled in his, but she didn't pull away. She didn't want to be alone in this. She couldn't. Not after everything they had gone through, after the strength they had both found in each other. If she was going to face this power, this curse that had haunted her bloodline for centuries, she would need him by her side. "You don't have to do this, Liam," she whispered, her voice a fragile echo. "There's still time. You can walk away. You can." "No." Liam's voice was firm, cutting through her hesitation. "We've already come too far. This ends here. We stop the syndicate. We stop everything they've planned. And if I'm not the same when it's done, then so be it. I'll take whatever comes. For you. For the galaxy." Zelira's eyes welled up with tears she refused to shed, not in front of him. The strength that had carried her through so many trials over the years, her defiance, her fearlessness, seemed to falter in the face of Liam's unwavering resolve. He didn't understand everything, not yet, but his willingness to walk this path with her. It gave her a strength she had never known. She wasn't alone anymore. The air around them seemed to shift as the realization settled in. This was it. The time had come. They couldn't run anymore. Suddenly, the faint hum of engines reached their ears. They both turned in unison, recognizing the sound immediately. The syndicate's ships. They had found them. The chase was over. Zelira gripped Liam's hand tighter, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no more hiding, no more waiting. The moment had arrived, and they were out of time. "We can't outrun them," she said, her voice thick with urgency. "We need to do this now." Liam nodded, his expression unreadable, but there was a fire in his eyes that Zelira had never seen before. A resolve. The determination to see this through to the end. They had found a secluded cavern deep within the jungle, a place hidden from prying eyes. The walls were covered in ancient symbols, remnants of the Velthran ancestors, untouched by time. The air inside was cool and still, as though the cavern itself held its breath, awaiting what was to come. It was here that Zelira had been taught about the bond, the power she carried, and the sacrifice that was required. This was the place where everything would change. "Are you ready?" Liam asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. Zelira looked at him, her green eyes wide with emotion. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. "But I know I have to do this. I have no choice." And with that, they moved to the center of the cavern. The symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, as if reacting to their presence. Zelira placed her hand over the largest symbol in the center of the floor, a symbol of power, of life and death intertwined. Liam stood beside her, his hand hovering just inches from hers. There was an electric tension in the air, like the universe itself was holding its breath. "I'm scared," Zelira admitted, her voice barely audible. "But I trust you, Liam." His gaze softened, but his resolve didn't waver. "We're in this together, always." Without another word, Zelira closed her eyes and placed her hand firmly over the symbol. The ground beneath them began to hum, a low, resonating vibration that seemed to pulse through their very bones. Liam reached out, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. The moment their skin touched, the world exploded. An overwhelming wave of energy surged through them, a current so powerful that it felt like it was tearing them apart. Zelira gasped, her body trembling as the power inside her began to merge with Liam's. She could feel his very essence, his soul intertwining with hers, and it was more than she had ever imagined. This wasn't just about DNA. This was a union of mind, body, and spirit. The power coursed through them, filling the cavern with light so bright that it seemed to burn away the very air around them. For a moment, it was as if time itself had stopped. Zelira could no longer tell where she ended and Liam began. The bond was forming, a connection that was beyond anything she had ever known. And as it solidified, she felt a deep, bone-shaking change. It was as if the very fabric of her being was being rewritten, reshaped, altered. She felt the power coursing through her veins, but it wasn't hers anymore. It was theirs. Liam's breath was ragged beside her, and she could feel the strain in him. The connection was not easy. It was consuming. But through it all, they held each other steady, their bond growing stronger with each passing second. And then, with one final surge of energy, it was over. The light dimmed, the vibration stopped, and the cavern fell back into stillness. Celira and Liam stood there, their hands still locked, their bodies humming with an unfamiliar energy. It was done. But as they stood there, catching their breath, a terrible realization began to sink in. The syndicate was on them. The sound of engines grew louder, and the tremors of an approaching threat were impossible to ignore. Their moment of peace had been fleeting. The world outside was waiting to crush them. With a sharp breath, Celira opened her eyes, feeling the power flowing within her. And with that power came the clarity of purpose. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a weapon, a force of nature, and she had the strength to fight back. Liam stood by her, his posture now more confident, his presence larger than life. She could feel the bond between them, the strength of their connection, and in that moment, she realized the truth. This was no longer just about survival. This was about taking back everything they had lost. Together, they would fight the syndicate. Together, they would change the course of their universe, and they would do it as one. The first steps toward victory had been taken, but the battle was far from over. And the future, it was theirs to shape.